Hello, everyone. I'm Gemma Star. Welcome to another episode of Heart Warriors. This is a series. Well, actually, I woke up one day and I knew that I was going to do it. First, I knew of it, but here we are. People who don't know me, I'm a writer. I've never really put myself much out there on screen, but so thank you for joining us and sharing this journey with us. What we're here to do is give a platform to our men to share their journey into the heart, and this has come from Katajuda, which is the sacred masculine site behind me, very close to Uluru, which is the sacred feminine site. And they just happen to be in the heart of Australia. And this is the energy that's coming through at the moment, especially for the masculine to rise heart and spine, and with us women right by their side. So what I'm asking the men that join us to do is to share their experiences, their pain, their joys, their challenges, their insights, their wisdom, their knowledge, tools, practices, everything that they've learnt along the way, incorporated into their daily lives to be the men they are today. And they can share that journey here with other men, and of course, us women who are seeking to get a better insight into the masculine journey. Our guest today is a man called Ian Morris. He's in the States and he is a sound alchemist, musician, artist, and poet. And another little insight, what I do with each guest is ask them to choose their own subtitle for the show. And Ian has chosen The Future is Frequency. So let's bring Ian on and enjoy the show. Hello, Ian Morris. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing super well. Thank you. You're over there in the
Awesome.
States. Whereabout are you?
I'm just outside of Oakland, California, or Lake End, Oakland, California, right here. Yeah, so it's 6 o'clock at night, and it's nice. It's always sunny here for the most part. It's really nice.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
it's 11 a.m. here and it's sunny here as well. So we're doing well.
awesome.
Can we start by how would you describe the man sitting in front of us today? You.
Yeah. Um, a little bohemian, a little nomadic, and definitely a warrior poet, I guess, something like that.
Yeah,
So,
I love that.
yeah. hmm
I, I love that. Um, so let's jump back to your childhood and look
Okay.
at what was your most challenging time?
I think just growing up being dyslexic, it was really the learning style was very different from what most kids had to deal with. So functioning in a learning, like the learning model of traditional uh, American schooling was really hard for me. I learned differently, and I think the things that inspired me were very different from my peers. And it wasn't until after high school that I really found my learning style, and it was through poetry, music, and art, those creative expressions that I think that really set my soul free and got me inspired for the first time to want to learn and to want to learn subjects that I could apply in the real world that gave me a real passion or a sense of mission in the world. So it was very, I think that was one of the most challenging parts of my childhood was trying to fit me, my square peg into a round hole. So,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
totally. Um, what's the, how old were you when you first became really aware of this? And can you describe the experience little Ian went through?
Yeah. Well, I think that I don't think it was till just before the end of high school. My mother was a very loving, strong woman, and she was always encouraging us to feel our emotions and I mean, she showed by example. Somebody cried, it would make her cry. If she was watching something on TV, a movie, it was emotional, and there was passion, she would cry, and she would, it was just something that you saw her expressing her emotions in a very healthy way. And so I remember there's two times I can really remember noticing that there was something different about me. And that was, I was in a Barnes and Noble bookstore when I was young, I would say, um, maybe 10th grade, so it was like, that's how long it took me to really, because up to that point I had kind of been, playing sports and kind of trying to fit myself into what everyone else was doing. But I remember being in the Barnes and Noble bookstore and picking up the Essential Rumi book from poems, and the cover really just grabbed my attention, and I picked it up, and I remember, to this day, the poem was "In the Arc of Your Mallet" by Rumi, and when I read that poem, it brought tears to my eyes, and I was pretty much a jock, kind of person up until that point. I was starting to get into music a little bit and starting to kind of explore other things outside of that, construct of like sports and macho-ness and all of that. And I read that poem, and it was just like there was something that it awakened in me, and I could just feel those emotions come out. And I remember leaving the bookstore thinking, huh, that's interesting, like what just happened here. And I think the next time was when my mom, I was probably the next year, my mom gave me a copy of The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, and reading that book was like a change. And I remember later learning that like Johnny Cash gave that to his wife on their first date when he went out with her. And I just thought it was really interesting. It's such a profound book and very deep, and it's very poetic in the way that it was written. And it's just, yeah, that was, those two were like defining moments of like making that shift into more of a creative, poet, creative expression, lifestyle, for sure.
Oh, fascinating. So, are you saying that the schooling system didn't cater before? Is your year 10 when you're about 16?
Yes, yeah, you're, yeah, 16, 17 when you're in the 10th and 11th grade there.
Yeah, yeah, same with
Yeah, and
us.
so I
So
think I was
before,
starting to wake up a little bit there.
so before then, you can't remember any. Can you remember any instance when the school catered to your creative side?
No. Yeah, I think like the cookie cutter method, where it's like one style of learning is applied to the masses, I think is such a broken construct and old paradigm. Because I think as we're learning, all these, indigo children and rainbow, and just all of the different styles of people that are coming into the world at this time, are just so different. And I think we came in to be system disruptors, to challenge the status quo and to kind of challenge the establishment. And I think that that one size fits all and that cookie cutter method is like really outdated. And I think that when you inspire someone to learn, you're not controlling them. You're inspiring them to take what they learn and apply it in a real world application. And that's not control. And it's also teaching someone with the knowledge that they are going to grow and may one day surpass what you have taught them. And I think that that's a real blow to the ego, to the academic establishment, because they want to hold that pedestal and kind of talk down to people. And you see that in the medical community, and you see that in a lot of industries. But I think that, even when Steve Jobs was passing away, like one of the things that he said is that companies that lasted 100 years are going to be a thing of the past, that technology is evolving so quickly that if you last 5 years, you're going to have done something, because it's just changing so quickly. So I think like wrapping your head around those philosophies, like the people who are planting trees and know that they will never reap the benefits of the shade, and like saying like how important that is. And I think if like our teaching models adopted that philosophy of like we're empowering and wanting to inspire generations to do better than what we did, and to see that they may do something that we may never have had the foresight to look at, I think is a really great model to,
Oh, I
to
love it. I love
adapt.
it.
Yeah.
I totally agree. Um, were you labeled dyslexic? And at what age did that happen?
Oh, I think second and third grade, it really started coming out. They started doing testing on me at that time because I would be so frustrated at homework. And I remember telling my mom, like in fourth and fifth grade, like, what's the point of doing this work? It just seems like busy work. And I was just so uninspired. And I think if I would have been encouraged to explore poetry, music, and art. And I think that when you look at dyslexia as a whole, almost every person, Albert Einstein was dyslexic, Richard Branson from, Virgin, it was dyslexic and even wrote a book about dyslexia and how it's a superpower. And I think it is a very, I mean, almost every person I've ever come across that has dyslexia has some form of creative talent and expression and some kind of creative thinking power, And so I think, like, for me, it's just dyslexia is a different wiring of the brain that is just misunderstood. And it's, again, trying to be fit into a cookie cutter method where everyone's the same. And dyslexia is definitely the brain working in a different, completely different way. And I think it's inspired to learn and to grow in a completely different way. So, how I relate to dyslexia would be that it was almost like a slow processing power, like for real world applications, like things that I wasn't interested in would just like really turn into mud and just kind of get stuck, and like I would feel like cobwebs, were, just kind of like slower thinking. And when I was in my passion and in things that really lit me up, it's like my brain would be firing on all cylinders. And it was almost like your brain's way of saying, like, this is not for you. This is not your
Yeah.
area. Like, you should be over here doing this. And that's kind of what I felt like dyslexia was almost like a measurement system of where my attention needed to be applied.
Definitely. I love that. The reason I asked about the labeling is that I'm totally against labeling children. Giving them that identity at such a young age. I mean, who
Yes.
gets to
Mm-hmm.
decide that? The medical system, the school system, and how does that child carry that? So, can you remember the point where you were labeled dyslexic, and what did that feel like? And did you carry that then because an adult had told you that was your label?
Yeah, I mean, I can remember the way there was a lot of times when I would like write, especially you'd have to get up in front of the class and write on the board, or write, in your notebooks and in journals and things in class. And I can remember thinking that my mind would work much quicker than my hand could translate. And I even see it to this day, like when I'm channeling poems. um I sometimes have to start writing in shorthand to try to keep up with what's coming through my mind. It's just coming so quickly that it's hard to kind of capture it all. And so, yeah, so I remember, getting made fun of quite a bit in school because it took me longer to answer. I had kind of a stutter sometimes, or speech impediment, because of that lack of transmission between how fast my brain was working and the real world application of delivering the speech. And so there was lots of times where I was just made fun of and had a lot of challenging, issues and instances growing up, um, in the classroom. And I remember I would also write things where in my head it was a certain way, and then you go back and reread it later and you're like, oh, I wrote it's like backwards. And all kinds of just different little things that didn't translate, because it seemed like I was doing it correctly. And so, yeah, I think it was just a challenge where you were labeled that, and then it almost made you second guess yourself for the rest of the time, and then dealing with all of the, bullying and the poking fun at and all of that. On top of that, I think it really does a damage to children's self-esteem, their self-worth, and also their abilities, to just function in the world, with those kind of diagnosis. So
Totally agree.
mhm.
What coping mechanism did little Ian develop to
Yeah.
deal with that?
Well, I think for a long time I didn't. I think a long time there was just a depressed person who, later in life, after high school started really gaining weight. And there was a lot of things, like I had played sports, and then sports was kind of taken away from me through physical things. I had some heart, mitral valve prolapse and some other things I was diagnosed with, and had some just arrhythmias and different things that took sports out of the picture for me. So there was this, a few dark nights of the soul along my path, where I would get really depressed. And as in high school, I started smoking weed and drinking, hanging out with different sets of kids, from the sports players. I started hanging out with like the hippies and the druggies and the skateboarders, and all the different styles of people and things that they were into, and started self-medicating, doing smoking weed and drinking, and just trying to not be depressed. But it's a cycle, when you get into that, it's those things will help you for that moment, but after it fades, you're left where the change to the brain chemistry is so vast and sudden that the next day you're like, well, I need to do that again. And it's just this cycle of high, and then coming into a depression, and sometimes even a lower depression than where you would have been before, and it turns into this cycle. And I can see that I'm really lucky that I didn't become an alcoholic, and I'm really lucky that I didn't do any kind of harder drugs that could have been addictive, because that would have set up that cycle. And so somehow I had guardian angels, watching over me. And I think I've always had pretty good people around me. It's some kind of karmic path for this journey, I guess, where I was very lucky to have, just really amazing people around me at every step. So um, I never could go too far, off. But yeah, it's something that I think self-medication, self-medicating myself in that time period was like a lot. And it ended up, getting to where food ultimately became that crutch, and started getting, overweight. I was about 320 pounds at my heaviest, so it was definitely a journey of trying to deal with those traumas, and just not having the tools to be able to process them.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing that, Ian. I'd like to, first, I'm going to ask you, was that your deepest, darkest moment? Because if not, we're going to finish off this little bit and then get to that.
Yeah.
What it was? Okay, so
No,
let's.
well, yeah. So in 2010, I went through, from that time period of the self-medicating, there was a lot of trying to figure my life out, in the real world. And for 10 years after that, I ran a nonprofit called Homemade Genius, and we worked with underserved kids with music and art lessons. And so it was really rewarding time, but it was also really challenging, because it was completely going against the grain. The city that I lived in was a small rural community, and we were bringing in every, graffiti artists and break dancers and hip hop and slam poets, but we were also doing like folk music and kind of traditional. And so it was like this huge cultural, um, plethora of genres of music that we were bringing into this small town. And so some people really liked that, and some people didn't. They wanted it to just kind of not have all the freaks, coming in. And so there was a lot of opposition in some areas. And so I felt a lot like I was fighting for these kids to have a place to go after school and to learn culturally some of the things that were out there and to inspire them. And I think we did that for the most part, but there was a lot of detriment to me because I believed in it so much. I had stopped doing self-care for myself and putting my entire being into this nonprofit and promoting that and pushing that and fighting for it in the community. And I was just young. I think, I mean, I look back and I was young. I was in like 28 or 29 or something when I started that. And, so it was like, really interesting. It's something that you learn as you get older, like self-care is so important. But yeah, so I found myself in 2011, 2012 in that time period, like um becoming sick and ill, and that was the dark night, that the real like deep dark moment for me, where I was diagnosed with MS and colon cancer and had a lot of health issues that I couldn't figure out. And it took almost a year to even get a diagnosis, and just, thousands and thousands of dollars of doctor bills and debt. I was a musician that didn't have health insurance. So I like went into a lot of debt, and I really thought I was going to die. I, contemplated suicide a few times because the pain was so great that I felt like it'd be better to not be here than to go through the pain that I was going through. So luckily, there was a book that my mom had given me and years before, and I never read it. It was one of those things like, read it, read it. And I was like, okay, I will. And I never did, just like, okay, mom, but never did. And for whatever reason, this one day coming back from the doctor, I picked it up and I started reading it. And that book was Louise Hay, You Can Heal Your Life. And
I know someone watching this, and I recommended it to her a couple of weeks ago, and she found actually a free version on YouTube. So, and that's one of the books that I recommend to people as well. Sorry to interrupt,
yeah,
but I'm just like
no.
thinking it's going to be that. It's going to be that. So You
Yeah,
Can
and
Heal Your
then
Life by Louise Hay, guys. Honestly, that came out in the 90s, I think, or late
yeah.
80s, and it's just brilliant, brilliant book for everyone to read. Not just to overcome medical issues, but just to get your mind in order and to realize your negative self-talk and where you're actually sabotaging yourself. So sorry to
It's okay.
hijack
No, no
that.
problem. Yeah, it's definitely worth people knowing about it. And it was a game changer for me. But at the same time, a friend had given me a copy of The Healing Power of Sound by Dr. Mitchell Gaynor. And I remember she gave it to me and she said, I found this and I think it's going to be more beneficial to you than to me. And so she just gave it to me. And I started reading those books at the same time. And they were just so eye-opening and soul-opening and heart-opening. And so I remember that those books gave me the drive and the determination and the hopefulness to overcome what I was going through. And so I immediately started applying meditation, breath work, intention setting, and I started trying to really work with my mind in a new way. But for me, what the breakthrough was the binaural beats and like using headphones and being able to listen to that when because I was the kind of person who could not sit still. My brain, because I'm a poet, I'm a painter, I'm an artist, of all creative. I love video editing. I love graphic design, anything that's like creative, making music. I play like 20 plus instruments, and anything that's creative, I love doing. So my brain is constantly, when I lay down in bed, it's like, oh, I could be painting, I could be writing poetry, and I hear music in my head, and it's like, oh, it's like, so it was just like really hard because I was just always wanting to create stuff. So the music helped me to finally sit still. And I remember calling my mother and saying, I'm 30 years old and I think this is the first time I've ever experienced peace, like ever. And it's almost like I was sitting in the quiet of the storm. I was observing the thoughts when I had the headphones on and was listening to the music, but I wasn't challenged by them or pulled out of center by them. And so I remember just tears, flooding me. And there was so much for the next 6 months to a year, just tears and tears, just cry every day, hours at a time. And I remember within a year I had lost 100 pounds of weight. So it was almost like the weight was like self padding and trauma, that had transpired through my life. And it was just such a huge thing, to let go of that. And that was really the process where I started really seeing the power of music more than entertainment, but as a therapeutic tool. And when I started listening to other people's music, I was like, I really like frequencies and binaural beats, but I just didn't like the music that they were paired with. Everything seemed like real cookie cutter spa. Everything was like flutes, and everything was done very in the same type of template. And I like that music, don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying, like, it just seemed like everyone was kind of doing the same thing. And I said, what if you applied this music into like other things like hip hop and trip hop and folk music and pop and all of these types of things, but also kind of really got into exploring meditation music that challenged a person with the frequency in a way that inspired that release, those tears, the feelings of uncomfortableness to come up, almost like going to the gym. Like, you're not going to be happy and smiling the whole time at the gym, but the process is to break the body down and rebuild a new one. And I think, like, what if you approached meditation that way, where you disassemble and reassemble something better? And that's what I wanted to do, was create music that was for healing and release work, rather than just being fluffy, relaxing music. I wanted it to be a process of awakening. I wanted it to be a process of rebirth. I wanted it to be almost ceremonial in the way that people interacted with the music, a sacredness, a passion, a deep something that was like had a soul to it. And that's what I really tried to do with creating the music. And I think it was such a therapeutic process. Like, it healed me creating this music that now people are using to heal themselves and to use as tools to help change their mindset or create new neural pathways or lower their rate or their brainwave activity, step it down to more of a theta brainwave pattern. So they're just more relaxed. And I think that it's just been so beneficial for me, but also for other people that I've been able to share it with. And it's just been such a humbling process. And so it's just an honor to be a part of that kind of experience with people.
Fascinating. Oh, it's so good. So you mentioned about when you started feeling the music, that you dropped the weight, because I was going to ask you earlier. So if we jump back, you were, alcohol, weed, overeating. Now, did you ease off all those three things together, or was there three separate journeys?
It was three separate journeys, but I think the last journey with the facing the colon cancer and the MS was facing death. And I think death, when you face death, you see it in a lot of the psychedelic, journeys that people go on, whether it's mushrooms or LSD. They, the people that have really bad trips, you know, are people that face the death of the ego. They almost feel like they died, or they get really scared and they face these really uncomfortable things that makes their ego come up against something so uh, that's almost like a tidal wave. And so they're forced to face themselves in a way that they never have before. And I think without drugs, I had to do that facing death. And I think that there's a lot of people who've had near death experiences or had things where they were on death's doorstep, where they were like, oh, this might be it. I might not make it through this. And then you start looking at life differently, and you start looking at your decisions differently, and you start looking at relationships with people differently. And so I think, like, for me, they were three separate journeys, but the last journey was the greatest journey that taught me the most, and really changed me to be way more spiritual, and to try to live in my heart full time instead of kind of halfway, kind of in and out based on relationships or based on if my life was doing well, then it was easy to live in my heart. But could you live in your heart during the hells and the valleys of your life? And I think that I started learning to trust it, even when I made poor decisions, and like whether I had the right, like made the right decision of the person I was dating, or made the right decision about the job I took, or the clients I was working with, or you know any of that kind of stuff. So I think like it was something that I just started learning to trust my intuition, because looking back now, that hell that I went through was probably one of the greatest things and greatest lessons and greatest teachers of my life. And I look at my life now and I love the man that I'm becoming. And I love the heartaches and hardships that I went through, because it shaped me and molded me into this person that is here today. And it would not be the same without those. And so for every amazing thing in your life that we give praise for or gratitude for, it's like we should equally be saying thank you for the hell. Thank you for the hard lesson in that relationship. Thank you for the job that I ended up hating, but it shifted me to have stronger boundaries in the future. And now, I really love all these things that are coming into my life. And there's just everything is a teacher, every single thing, even our poor decisions that we make are teachers. And so, yeah, I'm by far not a perfect person, but I'm definitely made closer to that by each of those failures or poor decisions. And they were all teachers along the way.
Definitely, and I can definitely relate to that. I always say, that, well, my abuser was my greatest teacher, let's put it that way. So, oh gosh, I've got so many questions I want to ask you, but one important one that I don't want to forget, you spoke about living from the heart and not half living from the heart.
Yeah.
Now, you don't, from my experience, you don't know you're living in the heart until you're living in the heart. You think you are, but in
Hmm.
retrospect, when you are in the heart, you realize then when you thought you were in the heart, you're actually in your mind. And
Yeah.
now you've put in a bridge as well, like half in your heart. Can you articulate to men the difference between not living in your heart, but maybe thinking you are, or not even there yet and living in your heart? What can really articulate the experience, please?
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting because in my line of work, I feel like I have to embody a lot of feminine energy. And I say that in a way that is not gender specific. I think like masculine and feminine energy are tools of our personalities. And I think that for me, I work in a field of mostly women in the holistic community and yoga communities, and all of these fields that this music is going into right now. There are a lot more women than there are men, which is really, baffles me, because I have a lot of friends who are single men, and they're like, I can't find a girlfriend, and I want this and I want that. And I'm like, yeah, but you're going to bars, and you should be going to holistic centers and yoga studios and meeting these women who have actually done spiritual work on themselves and can show up for you in a healthier way to have relationship. And I was like, you're not going to find that at a bar or find it on a dating app where most people are chasing hookups. You know what I'm saying? So I was basically like, living in your heart is where you stop fooling yourself and you literally face your shit. I mean, that's the only way I can say
Yeah,
it, is
love
that
it.
it's going
Yeah.
to be uncomfortable, and you're going to know you're living in the heart whenever you're not all rainbows and happy times. Like it's going to be a challenge, but the more you do it, the easier it gets, and then it starts to have those good feel goods, and you also are making decisions in that state of living from your heart that is not always from a selfish point of view. Like you learn to give unconditional love and know that you may not get that back in return right now. It might come back through other karmic ways. It also might come back when this person that you're pouring the unconditional love into is able to receive it in a way that they can then reflect it and give it back to you. And it's something where I say this all the time, like love is a choice. It's something that is not going to be comfortable and easy all the time. But it's like if you truly love a situation or a person, living in your heart is going to be a challenge, but it is a choice. And I think that I became more of a man when I wanted to choose love in uncomfortable times. And I think that means for myself, but also in intimate relationships and business partnerships. And listen, like I'm not perfect. You know, it's easy to say these things, and it's definitely something that has come easier over time and application and consistency. But you know, you're going to mess up and it's okay. It's like all of us do. And I think that messing up is some of the best work on
Yes.
this journey that you will do, because you're going to learn so much and be able to apply a knowledge that is going to be spiritual, it's going to be deep rooted, and it's going to ultimately be your healing. As well as when you get into business partnerships and communal relations, and you get into like intimate relations, you're going to be now a healing force for other people as well as yourself. And I think that these ripples, these like little dot connectors and ripples of like you know, that you're putting out there is like it is being the change that you want to see in the world. And I think that we are moving into a time of intuition. You know, people have been giving their power away for thousands of years to doctors, to, you know, the powers that be, the tax people, the, you know, it
Yes.
just endless, 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 right? So, but we're coming into a time where you realize that with the information that's out there, most doctors have really no idea about nutrition. And nutrition is such a fundamental building block of health. So if you start taking responsibility to become your own doctor, and listen, doctors are great. Like there's surgeries and there's things that are out there that we cannot do and we need assistance with. But what we're learning is the intuition of being connected with the mind and body and the heart, and like you start feeling this living universe that you're walking around in. Who could tell you better than yourself what is going on in here if you're truly connected? And I think that's the power of living in your heart, is you're starting to develop an intuition, creativity, connection to the body. You're starting to feel into things and experience things in a deeper sense, and you're able to start taking more responsibility for your life that way.
Love it. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Um, how would you, well, okay, do you use any specific practices to get into your heart space?
Yes. For me, so I'm gonna give you this exercise to share. It's very easy. So for me, breath work and meditation, intention setting, sound healing are like my go-tos. But moving my body, you know, yoga, kettlebells, push-ups, setups, jumping jacks, just really basic stuff that I don't even have to go to the gym to do, are things that I like to do. So moving my body, setting intentions and goals for myself with intimate partners, with myself, with my business, you know, it's like writing it down is so important for me. But um writing poetry is probably one of the easiest things, because all you need is a piece of paper and a pen, and it doesn't cost money. And then you just, the therapy that can be from you putting your thoughts and feelings into a paper and then reading it back to yourself, I think is probably one of the cheapest, easiest, and most therapeutic things that I could tell anyone. And there's this exercise I have that comes from a really, I don't know if we have enough time, but basically
Oh, sure,
there's a
yeah,
story. Yeah,
go
yeah.
for
There's
it.
a story. Okay. There's a story about William Burroughs, who was a writer, and a lot of people felt like he did just tons of drugs and was really out there, but he wrote a book called The Naked Lunch. And Naked Lunch was just really interesting. And I was listening to him describe this process of um, the cut up method. And I just thought it was a documentary about him, and it was just so fascinating. And so I developed this poetry writing from listening to him. But the story goes that he was at a party, and there was a guy that was an artist that had given someone at the party a painting previously before the party, and it was hanging at the house. And during the party, I guess he was drinking, and he looked at the painting, the artist, and he said, um, you know, I don't like that painting. I'm gonna take it down. And so he like cut it up with an X-Acto knife and like moved pieces of the canvas around and then like glued them on other parts of a new canvas that was at the party. And he started painting it. And before the party was done, he put it back up on the wall and he's like, all right, now it's done. You know, it's good. And so William Burroughs, as a writer, was watching this and he started thinking about his words at home, that he what like he had pages and poems and all these things that were unfinished. So he went home and cut up the paper and started rearranging all the words, and he started getting these really weird combinations like heavy metal kid. And in that book, Heavy Metal Kid, when he was describing that, it basically is where we got the term heavy metal from today. Like the way that he described this outsider type of character that just didn't have a care in the world and was just kind of like rough and tumble. And so putting all these words together like soft machine, it just doesn't make sense. But like when you start doing these combinations, all these things really rearrange and start giving new meaning. And it's a lot of things where it takes you out of the process, where it's like you're kind of co-creating with spirit in a way that there's no agenda and there's no expectation, right? So when I tell people in these workshops that we can write a poem by the time you leave here today, people are like, oh, I don't know if that's possible. And so, but what's really interesting is when you give them a piece of paper and you hand them a stack of books and you say to them, what I want you to do is to flip open the book, and whatever page stops, the first word on that page, I want you to write it down on your piece of paper. So we make a little circle at the top left-hand side of the page and we call it our word palette. And so we start collecting these words by flipping pages open and pulling the letters, the words out of the book and writing it in our word palette. And so I tell them, whenever you have about 20 or 30 words in your word palette, we're going to start rearranging these words to make a title for your poem. So it's not out of your brain. You don't have to think about anything. It's just you're co-creating with spirit. You're teaching people to become an open channel, and eventually they won't need the books anymore. Okay. So these books are references to get these words so that it takes your mind out of the game, and that you're basically just channeling in with spirit, co-creating this poem. So when people start getting the poem, some people get so inspired by the title because it's such a shock. Like, I just did this, I just made this title, right? And so then they write and people start writing and just really getting excited. And then other people use that process of the word palette for the whole poem. But at the end of the workshop, when people, and we listen to frequency music and we do meditation before we do these exercises, but basically at the end, people are reading their poems to each other and people are crying, bawling. You see the therapy happening in real time. And so eventually, when people do this on a consistent basis, they learn to not use the books anymore. They don't need the books anymore. They start opening that channel. Um, and so it's just really, really cool because people will say, well, what kind of book should I get? And I'm like, what kind of books do you want to get? What are do you have spiritual books? You got poetry books? You could use poetry books. It doesn't matter. Whatever is on your bookshelf, bring it over to the floor, get you some paper, get you a pen, and get ready. Put on some nice music, preferably instrumental music, so that there's nothing in your mind but instrumental music. And we have a CD just for these workshops doing this, like an album that we've made for this. And it's just so cool to watch that process unravel. And I think for me, it's one of the most therapeutic things that I've ever done. And it's a daily practice of mine. I write poetry every day. I make music. I love music. But I would say my number one area, my strong suit, would be poetry. I love my poetry. I love sharing poetry. But to this day, I have never published a poem. I've never put any of it out there. And it's just music has been my focus right now. And I always tell people, one day I'm going to sell my company and I'm going to retire to the hills and I'm just going to write poetry and start publishing books. That'll be my old man journey, right? So, but it's a lot of fun. And I think that people can benefit from it so greatly.
Definitely. I'm not sure if you're aware that I'm a poet as well. And I do publish mine on Facebook, but it's been, yeah, 5 or 6 years now since it started coming through in meditation. But what the point is, I can attest to it being a vital part of my healing journey, just to be able to express myself and get it
Yeah.
up on paper, and it didn't matter if people read it or not. It was there in public to be read, and because it
Yeah.
was always in good taste, even the tough times, you can word it in a way. And that was part of the creative process, that edge, between being authentic and expressing myself, but and then as a way of processing as well. And I did it in a little different way than you do, but that's part of the creative process. So can fully attest to writing as being such an important tool for anyone who feels inspired.
Yeah, definitely. That's so cool. And I have seen some of your poems on your page and they're beautiful and I think you're amazing at what you do. So whatever your process is, you should share with people and let them grow in that experience too. So,
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. But
mhm.
today's all about you. So So I want to, we've got about half an hour left. So
Okay.
I want to touch on, so when you had this diagnosis of several different illnesses and diseases in your body, let's talk about the process of how, are you healed now? Are you fully
Yes.
healed?
Mhm.
So can you
Yes.
walk us through that journey from wherever you want to start it to
Hmm.
what processes, what tools, practices? Let's get into the whole experience of how you healed yourself.
Yeah. Well, from the time of diagnosis, it was almost a year and a half, I guess, before that came through, but it was a lot of suffering before that. And so there was a lot of pain and a lot of money that was, gone. I went into debt to even get to that point. So when they finally said that's what was going on, you have a severe stage of colon cancer, and, these other things you're dealing with are MS symptoms. Um, they the treatment that they wanted to do was pretty astronomical, and I didn't have insurance, so even if I would have went to the specialist to do that, I would not have been able to do that. And in America, well, Australia is probably very similar. The UK is very similar, but a lot of the other countries around the world look at our systems and say, like, man, like, what is going on with you guys, right? It's
Yeah,
like,
we have
for
we have free Medicare, so
okay, okay,
no one
yeah,
goes without medical treatment. Yeah,
right, okay, yeah. So that's definitely not that way here, and the so it was basically I had to face, like, I'm either going to beat this some alternative way or I'm going to die. And um yeah, so for me, facing that, there was probably a 2 week period of just not being able to get out of bed, lots of tears and just depression. And I think, those books really helped, but there was still up and downs. And I think that I had to really start applying and consistent use of the binaural beats and the frequency music was what I, give the props to, for me to make the mental shift. Because in a lot of interviews, when I'm getting interviewed, they'll say, what is the number one thing that you say, for you getting healed, like what was the number one thing that you would attribute to that? And I would say mindset, because if you can go through motions, but you're not going to stay consistent unless your mindset is there. And I think that when someone's like, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, and they
Yes.
truly mean it, they're going to make the decisions. Like I'm a really big follower of Paul Chek. I was on his podcast and I really love the work that he's putting out in the world, but he'll say, like, don't BS yourself. Like he'll say, like, you can say I want to lose weight, but if you're not putting the action behind that, you're never going to do it, right? So for me to really put action behind getting healed, there was there was a mindset that had to change, because I was overweight, I was lazy, I was depressed, I was hopeless, all these things, victimized. Why me? Why is this happening to me? And I just was not in the right mindset to move forward. So the music helped me gain that mindset. It helped me have clarity and focus. It helped me to feel good without doing anything physical or making any decisions. I put it on and I could feel the difference. And so then I was able to start making better choices slowly. And I was
Mm.
able to start making better choices of moving my body, of eating better foods, of doing research to see what kind of foods I needed to be eating, learning combinations, like food combinations, like what foods to eat together, learning about metabolic eating, all these different things. And so people say, what was it? It was the music, number one, and it helped change the mindset. Then the mindset helped to make action into reality. And so it was a process that took about almost 2 years. But um, you know, the other thing that we're leaving out in this story is that I was homeless. Right after I got sick, I had pretty much lost everything and was kind of bouncing around on friends' couches or sleeping under a bridge. When 7 years ago, I started listening to Smile. When I started it, I was homeless. I had a laptop and a backpack and like maybe 4 changes of clothes. And so I started dreaming up what I could do. I would say I'm talented, I'm smart and intelligent. I shouldn't be in this position. What am I going to do about it? And then I started dreaming up all of these ideas for listening to Smile. And, I had friends and different people that were around me again that were encouraging or supportive. And like I said, there's always been some type of guardian angel. Like this was almost a process that I signed up for, which it was hard for me to admit. Like when you look back in retrospect, you can see that there was people, books, instances, opportunities every step of the way that was leading me on this path of learning more. And it was just so challenging to admit that, to say, like, looking back, like, yeah, I guess I did sign up for this and this is something I decided to go through. But anyways, to get back on track, it was just such a process to climb out of that hole. And I think that the music and all of those things, those facets paired together helped me get to the end goal. And I think that a lot of people think like, well, if I just listen to the music, this is going to fix me. And I'm like, no, if you just do nutrition, it's not, it's a combination. Like we get out of alignment from a lot of different things, not sleeping correctly, not eating right, being under stress all the time, all these different things, and they start tearing us down. So the rebuilding process is going to be similar. We're going to have to move our body some. We need sunshine. We need to get proper sleep and eat proper nutrition. We need to give ourselves pause, in our day, like do meditation, listen to sound healing, set an intention for the way you want your life. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned is that most people just have life happen to them. And I was one of those people waiting for it. But all of us, like the poets, poets, musicians, dancers, artists, all of this is like what people think of as creatives. But like a single mom trying to feed her kids on a budget, shoestring budget, that is a creative. someone that has creative thinking skills and a job opportunity to make the job better for the people, the workers, for the company to be more productive. This is a creative person. So all of us have creativity, and all of us are creators of our life. We're sculpting it. So these intentions, these goals, these dreams are all amazing, powerful things. And the only responsibility, your free will in this life, is to make the decision to put the action to the dream. And like those things coming together is what is going to be your creative process for sculpting and molding this life. And I'm learning that. And there's days I have to beat it into myself again and again and again to remember. But there's really amazing things out there, like the Master Key System, Think and Grow Rich, Neville Goddard, Florence Scovel Shinn. There's these amazing people that have these books and all of these things that we can go back and learn from. And the thing that's so shocking is most of these were put out in the early 1900s, you know, and it's like, it's so amazing to know that that is starting to come back into the awareness of mainstream. And it's a really cool thing.
Ian, I loved what you said about when you started listening to the high frequency music, you started making better choices regarding lifestyle. And you know, that's exactly what happened to me, but through yoga. So I started yoga 20 years ago. And at the time I was smoking, drinking socially, terrible diet. But I didn't consciously drop any of those things. But as I continued a regular practice of yoga, they just organically fell away. Well, after my first yoga lesson, didn't want to smoke anymore. So that was easy. And then as for the others, they just, eased off as now, I don't drink or smoke and eat like, raw, healthy. So it is. And it's interesting that for me, it was yoga. For you, it was the music, but it's just bringing that high frequency practice into our body. So even and often men especially will say, oh, I'm not doing yoga, I'm not flexible. Not that you need to be flexible for yoga, but that's another story. But doing it through music is an option for maybe people who don't have that mobility or the want at the present to do the physical. So is there anything you can add on to that?
Well, what's really interesting is what you just said is like such a physical, it's a physics property. I mean, so all of us have a friend that is depressed or heavy or always focusing on the bad things in life. And then we all have that friend. I mean, it's just inevitable, that is super happy and looking at life in a way that's always upbeat, and they're just very optimistic. And so this is a form of vibration, in our world. Everything is a vibration of light or sound. In our perceived reality, everything is operating under that. And so like if I were to bring, let's say that we had the happy go lucky club, and like all my friends who loved life and were really excited, we got together in a room every weekend and we just talked about how great life was. And I invited my friend who was real depressed and real down on his luck and upset at the world. And I said, come hang out with us, man. Like, let's hang out. So he comes in and he starts telling everyone all his heavy stories, and everyone's like, that's not my experience, bro. Like, my experience is I'm supported by the universe. Everything's blissful. I'm excited and I'm happy. And so he goes to every person and starts telling the stuff, and they're just not having it, right? So eventually he's either going to leave or he's going to transform himself to be part of the group. And so that's a perfect example of how vibratory energy works, because like you started bringing in yoga and your body felt like, oh, this feels so good. And it was to a point where cigarettes were like, I'm out of here, dude. Peace. Like, yeah. And so it's like, I think like it's with music for me, it was like the trauma that my weight and my body was carrying was just, it didn't like, it's like almost if you think about those low vibrations as entities that have attached themselves to you. And then, I mean, I know that might be heavy for some people, but just in a metaphor, that there's these entities that have attached to you of addiction or trauma or pain or whatever, and you bring in these high vibrational modalities or philosophies, and then the body starts becoming a different a different like landscape, to the point to where these low vibrations can't adhere or attach to that anymore, and so they have to go somewhere else. And so I think what I try to teach in my workshops with people is to have a gratitude for those things being in your life or in your energy field, to the point of when they go, it's almost like me now. I walk around and know what it's like to be 100 pounds lighter, and I can feel
Yes.
like, man, it just feels so good to operate in life like this and not be so weighed down. And I think trauma and addiction and pain, when we let those go, they can be almost as freeing and as me losing 100 pounds. Like, you walk around lighter and you feel better and you can breathe different, you can enjoy life different. So I think like it's such a powerful thing for release work and healing like that.
Oh, definitely. And our every as you said, everything is energy. And I think that every circumstance and experience, and as you said, addiction is also a level of energy. So as we increase our vibrational frequency, we outvibe lower frequency practices like drinking, smoking, other low vibrational experiences. We just rise above them. So as long as we can, and then we start aligning with the higher choices, the better quality food, the maybe being more physical, better company, more positive aspects of life. And that's how it works. We raise our
Yeah.
own frequency.
Yes, for sure. I agree to 100%.
Yeah. Look, I'm sure, we've got about half an hour left. So I was just interested because I've touched on things you brought up in your experience, but I can see you are so aware of so many aspects. What would you like to bring into this conversation that we haven't touched on yet?
Oh, I think one of the most interesting dynamics going on in the world right now is masculine feminine energy.
Love
So
it. Go.
yeah. So I have this conversation with a lot of females in my life, and they'll say, "What do you think about women in power?" And I said, "I think it's much needed, but I think that there's also um, a fear in me as a man that I would say there's a lot of feminine energy that is going into places of power that are coming in with the same masculine energy that has caused the damage." And it's almost like an energy that's like, I've got to prove to, like, you've had your turn, let us have our turn,
Yes.
and we're going to do better than you, and we will show you how things are. And I'm like, whoa. I'm like, this is the energy that you're so against with
Yes.
the men. This is the ego. This is proving something, or and I was like, when I think of divine feminine energy, I think of creativity, intuition, nurturing, love, unconditional love, and these things that are going to heal these toxic masculinity identities that people are complaining so much about. And I think, like, the other thing I also talk about is, where do you think toxic masculinity comes from? It's just from the fathers? Because it's not. It's There's mothers who are watching this take place and they remain silent. And that silent, like when we watch an African American get beat by a policeman, and there is definitely racial profiling going on, and we're on the street and we stay silent, we are part of that problem, right? So what I'm trying to say is, like, I feel like there is such a opportunity here for men to grow into a healthier version of ourselves, with the help of the divine feminine rising. And I think that men can play very crucial and supportive roles in this transition that is taking place to balance the scales. And I don't think it should be one or the other. I think it needs to be this. And, like, to do this, the feminine is going to have forgiveness, which I think is a huge part of feminine power, is forgiveness. And I think that we as men, and in general, and especially white men in general in the planet have so much to be asked to be forgiven for, and the way choices we've made, things that we've aligned ourselves with, the positions of power that we've tried to hold for so long, and the amount of damage that has come from the indigenous people, the African American, the female gender in general. There's so much of that, but I also know that um, asking someone to hold responsibility for generations and generations before them is completely unfair. And it's just, in my opinion, obviously all this is my opinion, but I feel that there is just all of this to say that there's this huge opportunity to rebalance the scales, and doing that, it's asking the feminine to find forgiveness in their heart, and to raise that forgiveness with unconditional love, and realizing that that nurturing power is a super powerhouse of transformation for the planet. And I know through my process, I grew up with three sisters. My mom was a super empowered woman, emotionally, and just such a powerhouse. So growing up around that, and then um, I'm a very sensitive man. I'm a Leo sun sign, and I'm a Cancer rising, and I'm an Aries moon. And so we put those signs together, and they're fire, fire, and it's like it's I definitely, as in my younger years, identified with the Leo. But in my, as I'm developing and getting older, I definitely resonate more with the Cancer, and those qualities of that sign astrologically. But I'm a lover, and to be a lover, I think you have to be a good listener. And I think that that's what I'm asking in these conversations that I'm having with people is, I understand that you're upset. I understand that you're hurt and that you want things to be different, but could you see the perspective that you having compassion in your heart for these people, these men that you're talking about with this toxic masculinity, they're just hurt. They don't have the tools to fix these parts of themselves. And a lot of times it's not about being angry at them, it's about feeling compassion in your heart and saying, like, what part am I in this, like, position am I playing in this, and what is something I could lend to that. And I think, like, for me, how that looks is when I have like masculine men bashing women, that I speak up and say, I disagree, and here's why. And I think, like, for women it's very similar when someone's bashing men, for them to speak up and say, they just don't have the tools. You're looking for them to be this certain thing, and they've never had this understanding or this introduction. It's like saying someone in religion, like, oh, they're not saved. Well, it's like, well, it has Jesus or Buddha or any of these things, these philosophies, been introduced to this person to even have that thought of something outside of themselves? And so I think, like, my point is just that I think the COVID and all of the things that we just went through was a real opportunity for a reset, not in the economic sense and not in the powers that be, but in the genders, for us to really see that we are both needed. That when you have a relationship with a man and a woman, or anyone, to be honest, you bring two people together, and you have these skill sets where, like, maybe I'm really good at talking to people, and I'm really good at networking and connecting dots, and my partner has all these amazing talents for working behind the scenes but does not like engaging with people or networking. And so you put these two people together, and it's like the things that I'm really needing help with, she's there and has this huge sanctuary that she has set up for me in this way that provides these skill sets that are desperately needed to make me a better man and community figure. And then for her, I'm able to take some of her ideas and things that she might be too shy to bring to the public and say, here's this person, they've got this construct, they've got these ideas, and they've got these things that just need to be placed into the community and put into these spots. And so you start rearranging these pieces, and you start really seeing like why relationships are important, that where someone falls short, someone else has a strength. And I think that it ripples out past intimate relationships into communities, into government systems and things like that. And I think that where we've really fallen short is capitalism is great at inspiring people to want to have incentivized goals. But I think where capitalism really falls short is that it creates, by any means necessary, cutthroat mentality. I'll get mine whether or not they get theirs. And I think that's where the world has really fallen short, is America in general, I think, has, exported our military industrial complex. We've exported fast food. We've exported these entrepreneurial dreams that are raping and pillaging the world and, making money for people. But the world and the heart of humanity is you know, the consequence, for what's taking place. And so I think like the reason why masculine and feminine should really be talked about more is because there needs to be a balancing. And I think that I hate saying it this way, but I think it almost falls on to the divine feminine to step into forgiveness for how poorly they have been treated, and then also to raise it with this compassion and unconditional love that will ultimately nurture and heal and create this change that I think will be so powerful that men will have to submit to the sacredness of that process. It's something that we cannot do on our own. And I think that there's a lot in that nurturing and healing of the masculine. And as that starts awakening, the feminine will see that there is a sacredness in that as well, and that there's something that has been missing and much needed in that process as well. And then hopefully there will be a mutual respect eventually for the yin and yang of this whole process of coming here to this earth classroom.
Oh, definitely. I love it. That's very much the stuff I'm into as well. I mean, if I can add on to that, I'll say everyone's been hurt, everyone's damaged, everyone's, been brought up with some dysfunction of society or family or everything. So we're all dealing with our wounds. So for us to start firing blame onto everyone else is just going to go round in circles. So the only thing we can do as individuals is to start healing ourselves. When we start healing ourselves, we start healing our relationships, our communities, our view of the world. So as we start healing ourselves, we start having more compassion for other people that have been, sorry, that's my dog, not me.
That's okay. That's okay.
I'm not making any noises. But so we can see everyone with compassion, because we understand we've all been, I guess, victims at one point of the system, and now to break free and step into our sovereignty and our empowerment and our healing is the way that we're going to heal the world. And I loved what you also said about the divine feminine and the masculine, because I've been pondering that, especially also since I've been asked to do this series by Spirit, and pondering on it. I'm like, well, I think my last 5 or 6 years of healing as the coming into my feminine has prepared me for this, because I have, your number 15, and I'm going to interview 100 men, and they're all coming, and they're all being so very open and honest, and they're sharing their heart with me, and I feel very honored that these men, yourself included, are feeling safe enough with the feminine energy to be able to do that. And I think this is a pure example of it. The
Yeah.
feminine has to heal, not have judgment, not have blame. And the only way we can get to that point is by healing ourselves and healing our own individual wounds that we've had on our journey. So I totally agree with everything you're saying. The women had to heal first. And when I interviewed Charlie Freak, he said the word together, to get her, to come into her, and then, we heal. And another metaphor is, of course, Mother Earth. So it's fascinating. I love that subject. Is there anything you'd like to add on to that?
Yeah, I think as men, one of the things in the last 10 years, all the relationships that I've had, I think I did not realize the amount of trauma that women have sustained. Pretty much every person I have dated has had some form of sexual trauma. Um, and when you start, as I became more mature, you start realizing that women, um, the yoni is this sacred portal, and then you start looking at the throat and the vocal cords and how they're very similar in shape, and that this broadcasting of words and bringing this energy into the world is spoken through a very similar portal. And then this portal, the yoni, childbirth um and deep spiritual connection and pleasure and just all of the things that are associated with that. And then you think about the way that it's treated in society, the way it's treated in the medical system, the way that it's treated by men, that are unconscious or toxic or have had, traumas that don't understand that sacredness.
Mm.
And so the reason why I'm bringing all this up is to say that I think it's our responsibility as men to study and to learn, and to not only in a way of connecting with our partners and like sexual expression and connection, but in a way that is much more sacred in the fact of exploring how to help women hold that space for healing, and for them to feel safe the way that you're providing a safe space for these men to share and to grow in this experience and share these conversations. But the the women in our lives to be able to let go and release and cut cords with trauma and past experiences, and to know that this work is tough and challenging for both parties, but in the end, in these relationships with women and men doing this work together, womb healing, heart healing, and taking an active role in that. Because I think a lot of men think that that's the women's work to do and that they don't have a part in it. And I'm saying, like, I believe that there is a part for the man to play, not just in holding space, but education and learning and sharing that burden so that the relationships can go to a deeper, more profound level. And I think that this is what's needed on both sides. The masculine and the feminine is to really take an active role in those, um, that participation, together in that process. And so, yeah, that's just the only thing I would add to that. I think is that I think a lot of men don't understand the amount of traumas that a lot of the women in their lives have gone through. Yeah.
Thank you for acknowledging that. And yeah, I would agree too, as most women would. If a man's watching this and he's, thinking, well, hang on, he's at the stage where he's becoming aware that maybe there is more to the sacredness of women than being, an object or a release for their sexual desire or, whatever. Um, how would you recommend that a man starts to get in touch with this sacredness of the feminine? Does he have to do it through his own inner journey, or is there some external tool or practice you'd recommend?
Honestly, for me, it was two really big ways that I think both are crucial. And for one, it was reading different perspectives and books. I think reading lots of different perspectives and sources and kind of cross-referencing information
Yeah.
was huge in the beginning for me. And I think the second part was in conversation, like open-hearted, uncomfortable conversations with my partners. And I think that it's therapy. I mean, it really is. You're learning a lot, you're growing, you're understanding, and then you apply in these conversations and hold space. You know, you learn how to hold space. Every partner you have will not be the same in any regard, personality or likes and dislikes or love language or, you know, any of it. It's all going to be different. So I think that what you're really developing in those two activities, reading the books and the different perspectives and the conversations, is you're actually developing, learning the art of listening. And I think in listening and consistently showing up in that practice, you're starting to learn how to hold space. And I think that listening and holding space are like the two major ways that you're going to get your partner to feel safe to open. And in that opening, that is where the masculine healing is going to come from. You know, that opening of the sacred divine feminine. And I think that yeah, it's just a really, I would just encourage like reading books, probably stuff that your friends will make fun of you for. I remember a lot of my friends would come over to my house and look at my bookshelf, and there'd be like womb healing books and all kinds of stuff. And they would just, you know, give me a hard time, but I would just smile and I would just be like, one day you'll understand, man. One day, one day, one day you'll get there. But it's just, you know, I think it's cool that you have so many men that are conscious and open to being uh, open-hearted in these conversations, and I think that the world's going to be a better place for it. So
Amazing.
mm,
Wow. Where can people find more of you and your music and, whatever
yeah.
else you want to share? And any links that you talk about now, I'll add in the description on YouTube.
Okay. Yeah. So I love hearing from people and interacting with people. So my email is ian@listeningtosmile.com. And I love hearing from people and sharing if there's anything that they need with the music and stuff. And then the music you can get on listening to smile, the number one bandcamp.com. It's the wellness series and it's albums that people can purchase for personal use on that website. And then listeningtosmile.com is the website. There's a lot of information on there to learn more about the music. And then there's also opportunities to sign up for personal coaching. I call it it's personal frequency coaching. So it's teaching a little bit about sound healing. It's helping people to apply it in a day-to-day their day-to-day activities in life, and then also kind of customizing the areas of focus that they want to work on and kind of giving them a template to do that. And then I have a program for holistic practitioners that if they want to work with this music in a commercial setting, it gives the proper permissions and license, but it also gives them extra revenue streams and tries to create a new paradigm of business, interacting with people, creating gratitude payments and all kinds of different things so that they can make money and still share the music and be protected in that space with the music. So yeah, there's a lot of different things, but yeah, listeningtosmile.com, ian@listeningtosmile.com is my email. And then the wellness series is listening to smile, the number one bandcamp.com.
Amazing. Is there an opportunity for them to listen to the music for free on your website?
Yes, they can listen to some of the tracks for free on the wellness series, and they can also listen to some samples on the listeningtosmile.com.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for that.
Hmm.
Awesome. I
Yeah.
know because I had a little look before. So I know there's lots of free stuff on there. So, people can go and have the benefits and feel that high frequency music, as and just feel how it opens your heart, or feel into your body the changes that come with it. So yeah, I totally recommend going to Ian's website and exploring that. Well, wow, what an amazing show. Thank you so much, Ian.
Yeah, thank you. I really had a great time. I appreciate you having me today. So thanks.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, so thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for being here. And I'll be back in a few days with another episode of Heart Warriors. So, bye.